Speaking of, can I start my fight?
Oh yeah, why don't we do that? Let's start.
I want to start my goddamn fight.
Start your fight.
First, introduce your fight.
Actually, I want to show my video. Maybe I'll do that.
We'll do that after that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. But introduce your
Poor
fight.
Jordan with his fights.
All right. I made the fatal error of bothering to look at the comments. The reason that I hate looking at the comments is because there's always like a group niche of people that really have heavy set opinions about something that I can only describe as they never look at the counter side of the argument. I'll give you some very good examples of what we're always fighting about on this podcast, right? China, nuclear energy, the Labor Party, all of these opinions, the ones that I have now, I used to have the exact opposite of those opinions.
Yeah.
And then, you know what happened? I read the other side of the argument. And then I realized, okay, maybe a lot of the things that I'm taught in the press about China are all coming from a think tank that is funded by US manufacturing companies. Maybe the reason I think nuclear energy is a solution is because they have $100 million a year to spend just in the World Nuclear Organization, let alone the NRG or whatever it is. It was a long time ago that I was looking into it. There's a lot of money that goes into these fallacies. Then you go and you ask them, what's your counter argument to these points? Let's just use a nuclear example for it, right? And you say, okay, they say, there's thorium. All right. Where is it implemented? Nowhere. And it's all a big conspiracy that thorium isn't, implemented properly. They point to somewhere in India or something like that, and it's like they use uranium to enrich the thorium, so it doesn't really work, right? Like there's all these miracle,
we are on such
new,
different levels. God. I just wanted to make that known. Fucking hell.
But it's just they've got a few talking points. You say, and I've done this a million times before. I'm not going to go through the spiel again because I'm picking enough niche fights as it is. But you say, what are your counter arguments to this? And then they just go back to the 6 main talking points. I swear to God, another one of these is the idea that you can't farm cows in a sustainable way. They always agree that you can farm every crop in a sustainable way and that they just aren't being sustainably farmed. But you as soon as it comes to cows, all of a sudden, no, it's just this evil that just produces all of this methane and there's no way around it. You just have to eradicate all cows. Something along the lines of that. They always Alan Savory is their boogeyman that they go to. And this is one of the classic examples that I got. I got it from this dear listener called Bill, who wrote, farmers in Australia are arguably doing more damage to our environment than the entire energy sector. Yes, why would you say that? I know why, because Cowspiracy said that they are responsible for 51% of emissions, which is a ridiculous number. That the assumptions that they went to get to that level are extraordinary. When you look at the agricultural sector in Australia alone, I think it's like 15%, 17% of emissions in Australia.
Yeah, I remember really old fast statistics, so they might have changed, but they were around 14-15%.
It's around something like that.
Globally.
Well, so it's just kind of the same problems everywhere in the world, right? So that's assuming that cows are responsible for all 15% of those emissions first off, and then they go, oh yeah, but it's also because of the transport sector. Okay, well that's still not getting even close to like 50%. Oh, but it's also the food that they are using to feed the cows, which is the point that Alan Savory is trying to address, which is that you graze them during grasslands and stuff like that. So all I'm saying is that, when it comes, and this is another thing that I remember as well, I used to speak to the Climate Council a lot when I was getting my head around climate policy in Australia. And they were saying that the two big gripes that they have, and these are organisations, not-for-profits, some of the smartest, brightest scientists in Australia that left the government when it became the Liberals because they were like, we can't publish our work, we're going to have to start an independent organisation. These independent institutions, they're all at a headlog about this. There's just someone rings up all the time and goes, "You cowspiracy, just all conspiracy. You're just hiding the facts. The cows are the actual real problem for climate change." And they were saying that is as annoying to them as people come ringing up them and saying like, "It used to be hot in the 60s as well, so climate change isn't happening." It was just the other side of the coin when it came to that, right? But anyway, arguably doing more damage than our entire energy sector, which is just completely wrong, especially when you say something about transport, for instance. If you electrify transport, then no carbon emissions. So that's gone. So it's not the energy sector is the thing that you need to focus on, because that's where everything else stems out from. If everything is electrified, no emissions from any of that stuff. And we're talking about industry. I think at this point, even when it comes to carbon emissions from industry, I'm going to have to double check this, but I remember that there was special exemptions like, say, coking coal that you still need to get rid of emissions, but they figured out ways to electrify coking coal at this point, making the component that solidifies steel or whatever the fuck it is, right? See, there we have. And then it goes on to this point, which is what they always say, which is that farmers clear forest and that increases carbon emissions. And it's like, yeah, they do. No one's saying they should be clearing forests. And this is always the straw man that they put it in. Oh, I can't believe I even used the straw man. See, as soon as you get into these internet comments, sorry, that's a huge faux pas on my end. I don't want to ever use that word. But, they always say, you're saying clear forests for cows to reduce carbon emissions, which is absurd. What I'm saying is that there is land that is supposed to be grassland that is now desertified. And you know why that area gets desertified? It was because when human beings, no matter where they migrated across the planet, they wipe out all the megafauna. So when Aboriginals came here, used to have giant kangaroos, used to have giant wombats that would graze these lands and do the natural role that they no longer exist because these animals are extinct. That created desertification. The reason it creates desertification is the grass becomes too high, nothing's eating it, nothing's fertilizing it, and so all of these other plants that are in the grassland don't get any sunlight or anything like that, and it just creates a biodiversity dearth where you just have this taller and taller grass that happens. The soil becomes worse and worse in quality. The grassland starts to retreat. That's how desertification happens. And the reason that is happening is because there are no herding animals over the top of it. It's the same problem in the US with bison. There used to be millions of bison grazing these lands. Now there isn't. This is what created things like the Dust Bowl in the US, right? The Great Dust Bowls. What bothers me is that everyone's always up in arms about building projects in koala habitat, yet farmers are ones clearing all the koala habitat. Well, you just pointed out then that they're not. In fact, the last healthy koala population in New South Wales at the moment is currently getting its land completely destroyed by Lend-Lease. That is the last healthy koala population right now that is a result of property developers. It is not all farmers, and this is the whole thing, is that what I've always advocated is that you have conservation methods in practice to rebuild areas that were forest lands, but you also need to rebuild areas that used to be grasslands, and you can rescind that. You can make land that is now, partially arid or arid grassland again, which is what it used to be millennia ago. This is possible. There are numerous examples of this across the planet. It's very easy to look up. And it's, peer-reviewed studies on this as well. The same industry has been forced to pay workers a legal wage. Yeah. Farmers are terrible. We get it. Every single farmer on earth is a bad human being. This is the whole thing, right? When they're talking about these farmers that are clearing all of this land, you know where the vast majority of that land clearing is coming from? Mega farms. No one who is a serious conservationist is thinking that you should be factory farming animals, especially when, I think I was reading this the other day, I think factory farmed animals feed about 30% of the Earth's population, and yet they take up about 70% of all agricultural resources. So there's a huge imbalance there that happens when you start, industrializing this on huge scales and you do the monocrop culture. No one's advocating monocrop cultural stuff. So that's just completely redundant. There are countless articles and videos debunking Alan Savory's work. Well, there's countless articles and videos that are supporting Alan Savory's work and debunking the videos that debunk Alan Savory. So this is what I'm talking about. People don't look at the counter argument. I did look at the counter arguments when it came to Alan Savory. I've read a lot into it, actually, but this is a long time ago. This is the problem, same thing with nuclear technology. I saw this comment about an hour before I went on. I was just like, nah, it's not happening. The best report is Grazing Confused, which I did look up, which debunked the very silly regenerative agricultural fixes, the world rubbish. No, it doesn't. In fact, that, first off, has huge problems because the study that they're basing it off is essentially saying the same thing of like, you're clearing all of this land and then you're putting cows on it. It's just like, okay, well then the study's completely fucking redundant to begin with. I quickly looked it up. It's a 127-page report. But immediately, within the first 11 pages, it starts talking about the fact that if you get rid of land that is grassland, that has grazed cattle on it, and then and you remove them from it, it would have a negative effect on carbon emissions that it currently has now. This is one of the things that it's talking about in the report, if you can just look it up very quickly, right? And then he says, there was this big report, the CSIRO are involved, multiple universities. That's all well and good. The CSIRO are also involved in a bunch of multiple reports that also talk about the need to increase soil quality as a carbon sink and use planned grazing. I know CSIRO scientists that go to these places, say like in the top end and in Victoria, they go to these farms and they learn what they're doing because they have a much better, much more sustainable farms, and the soil is clearly a better carbon sink. I think from memory, they were saying that it was like 15 times better soil when they're using these things like holistic grazing, timed grazing, planned grazing, all of these things. Basically what you were saying before, right? You're just moving cows along and forcing them to do their natural thing that they do in the wild. And when I'm talking about that thanks, Miss Love. That's very helpful. One of the big things that they're all...
I fucked it. Just keep talking, I'll fix it.
How have you managed to do this, even when you're not in the frame?
And if this is the case, and I haven't even read the report, but I've just read like very quickly into it and seen the video, and it was just like there was so many glaring problems with it. It was just like, okay, yeah, let's just assume that cows are still dumping all of their waste into like those waste pits that they have in dairy farms, which everyone is saying you should stop doing that and let them just shit on the fields around the place, and that actually does drastically reduce the amount of methane that's coming out. Like it's because it's all stored in one area and it starts combusting amongst itself. It releases much more methane, and then again it gets sunk into the ecosystem. And then the next thing that he says is that grass, where is it? Yeah, carbon is just the roots essentially. It maxes around a few years and then you can guess what happens to all of the carbon. See, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the plant, grass. This is not where the carbon sink is. The carbon sink is in the soil. The soil increases in quality and that's what stores the carbon. It also requires more land use as farmland, which if you check, over 50% of land used is livestock pasture. And what's your point? Yeah, if it's getting cleared, that's a bad thing. But if it's like restoring land, which has happened in Australia, there are numerous examples. We had a guy that was a scientist and now is a sustainable agriculturalist. He was the guy. It's not like this guy is just like, in with big beef or something like that. He spends his entire life trying to get the government to have more sensible policies on pesticides, right? Because he realizes that that's one of the real secret killers, and water quality and all these things. He's a very knowledgeable scientist that spends his entire life going around the planet figuring out what the environmental solutions are and how to integrate agriculture into it. Because this is the insane thing about all of this, right? It's just like, you need to eat. Okay, you get rid of cows and all these kinds of things. The agricultural sector still produces carbon emissions. They can be negative carbon sinks. Anyway, but yeah, and then just saying like I'm constantly surprised at people's cognitive dissonance when it comes to this issue. So this is another one of those warning signs that I'm getting at here, right? As soon as you hear someone say cognitive dissonance, bad take, it's like that they're just reading, or they're not even reading. As this guy's saying, just look at this 8-minute video on YouTube. All right, here's my counter example, because afterwards he was saying, show me how cowspiracy is wrong. I'll wait. And it's like, okay, here's how it's wrong. I went up and looked at what Cowspiracy was saying about Alan Savory again, because it was years ago that I watched the documentary, so I wanted to say specifically what it was, and it was so helpful on the website. It was just smug and dismissive. It was like, if you even think this, then there's this article from George Monbiot, or whatever the fuck his name is, right? I remember George Monbiot's article being severely criticised by the scientific community. one of the main things, all his argument is just an extension of cowspiracy, which is just being smug and dismissive because they refuse to accept that there is a way of sustainably farming these creatures. And one of the things that they went to is these two quote-unquote peer-reviewed articles. I think from memory, one of them wasn't even peer-reviewed. And I think the other thing was one of them was doing planned grazing and not holistic grazing like Alan Savory says. Doesn't matter though, because any of these things are better than just keeping them in a paddock and doing nothing, right? Doesn't matter. Here's the point. The main thing is he says that these are the two peer-reviewed studies on this subject, which they're not, and that there are no peer-reviewed studies that support Alan Savory's claims. Not only are there just peer-reviewed studies, there are peer-reviewed studies. There's a bunch of university studies from all over the world that are going around not just holistic grazing, as I said, planned grazing, time grazing, all of these other things. They're all going into it. I'll give you a list of them now. I've shortened a lot of them because I was just trying to get to it. But if you Google these words, you can go look at these, right? Immediately off the bat, dozens of them. I've just chosen a few of them. Grazing management impacts on vegetation. Grazing management impacts on vegetation, soil biotic, soil chemical, and physical hydrological properties in tall grass properties. That's one that supports the idea that you should be moving these animals around. There was another one that was I think it was across thousands of ranches across Western Canada. And that was, and this was regarding Holtec, Brisk, and rebuttals by Teague, Gill, and Savory. That says that carbon can be sequestered in soil. More carbon can be sequestered in soil than is currently put in the air with human activity. This is the same thing as this former woman that used to work at the CSIRO, whose name escapes me. I did a video on it years ago. You can go look it up. I'm talking about this on my Friendlyjordies channel. But again, there's a bunch of CSIRO scientists that say that this is the way to go. But in general, they're just talking about a 20 to 30% methane reduction from air if you start moving cows around in this way. This is what that study was saying. There's actually one just called Australia Managing Grazing Landscapes, so right here. And that one says that out of dozens of samples, that this is the one that they always use. I see this all the time. Vegans always put this up as this study said that it's actually has no impact on it whatsoever. And that is such a careful, selective reading of the study because it's just going, all right, in this one area that we did it, it didn't have any impact on carbon sequestration. This one area. We looked at dozens of areas and it all had a positive impact on carbon sequestration. Positive impact on it. I think that the study was going for a few weeks, let alone years. When they're saying that it's going to release back into the air, you're talking about one study from that university that is saying, okay, but there needs to be, and it keeps saying it over and over again in the study, there needs to be more research done on this, especially when they are assuming that all of the practices that are currently being used on grazed cattle, so we're not even talking about, these kind of holistic management things, is still in practice. So you're still moving in feeding to feed these animals. There's all of these problems with it. Emerging land use practices, emerging land use practices, you look that up and it talks about increasing soil organic matter. So we're talking about the same thing over and over again, but this one has the even more poignant point, which is that if you practice these, if you put these practices on this land, it actually sequesters as much carbon as the soil in forest land. Now, I am not saying that you should be cutting down trees to put it on there, but this is the level of regeneration that can happen in these ecosystems if you're doing it the right way. Now, the other major point needs to be stressed. The biomass in the world now, today, is far lower than what it was pre-humans. So before humans, there was just so many more animals that were supporting the ecosystem. The collective biomass of the planet was a lot higher than it currently is. And that was because there was a lot of megafauna in these grasslands that is now completely devoid. This is the answer around it. That's my response.
First of all, that was really good. Secondly, pay less attention to comments.
Sorry, yeah, it's another one of these things that just angers me so much because it's okay, you can disagree with it, but you're not disagreeing with it on the even the argument that they're having.
Well, I think some of it is obviously mudslinging, saying things like, do you want to cut down forests to do this? That's not what you're arguing. I think eventually the argument between you and this commentator, let's say.
And there's another one here. Jack says, one more, says, the majority of cattle farming in Australia is on land that cannot be regenerated. Not true. The majority, those studies that I was talking about then are talking about regenerating land. The majority is desert-like terrain and has been for a millennia. Well, it's been desert-like terrain for a lot longer than a millennia, but anyway, you're going to reduce methane emissions by 30% in 8 years, not by reducing the head of cattle, but by regenerating relatively tiny areas of land. What? So all of Western New South Wales? Yeah, tiny. To sequester trivial amounts of carbon. As I was saying, peer-reviewed study, 30% drop in methane. Yes, I think that you can do that in 8 years. Yes, that is my opinion. Thank you. So get your cry laugh emojis out of the comment.
First of all, I think someone commented while you were talking about this that this is gold and you should do a video on this on your main channel, to which I concur. Having said that, dude, it all boils down to this argument that you're having. He doesn't trust the data that you're presenting to him, and you are disagreeing with the data that he's presenting to you. So clearly, this is an intellectual difference that you have. But I think you've done a pretty good job at explaining why you are right. And some of these, some of these are bogus claims. Like there's no peer review studies or mudslinging. Like, are you trying to cut down forests to do this? That's not what you were arguing in the first place. So ignore that. It all boils down to him not agreeing with the grazing methodology.
Well, this is the main thing that I just want everyone to get into their minds, because this is the thing where I realize, oh, okay, actually, there's got to be something to this. This used to happen naturally. It has not happened naturally for what, 30,000 years, 20,000 years? That's why there's so much desert in Australia. There's also the fact that, the topography of land clearing that happened in European settlements. So Europeans take the credit for, all the land clearing that's happened since. But the desertification is because there are no megafauna sitting on these grasslands anymore.
Wait, so are you saying that, because I don't know this topic nearly as much as you, so are you saying that the desert lands of Australia can technically be green?
No, not the
without
deep
a
desert.
Bunch of water?
Not the deep desert, but those kind of areas.
The peripheries.
Like, the periphery areas, that kind of semi-arid land, that starts to expand and becomes grassland. Because that's where the desertification
is happening in Australia, right? Where these semi-arid lands that used to be at one point a lot less arid than they are now, and with climate change, they're continuing to desertify more and more. Yes. So you're saying those parts, let's just say regional New South Wales, yes, as opposed to country New South Wales, can be regenerated.
Yes.
And I would like that. It seems like a small area. That's a massive area.
It's a huge amount of land. I think this study was saying, the one that the CSIRO scientist was saying before, again, she left because of the great retreat of scientists under the Abbott government. I think she was talking about a 0.5% increase in productivity of soil would sequester carbon of all human activity, right? Like, this is big, interesting, earth-changing stuff that can happen. And at the very least, this is the other insane thing. What? You're going to go convince the cattle industry that they're going to have to kill off all their cattle. You're going to do that in the next 8 years, are you?
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
That's a
Good luck with that. How much better would it be to just come up to them and say, you can make more money and you can make additional crops on your land and you can be paid as part of this carbon offset scheme that's coming in if you just farm your cows in a slightly different way.
Yeah, just introduce those regulations where you have to conform to certain methodologies. But so that video, that Alan Savory video came out, 7-8 years ago?
Yeah.
And he actually did a follow-up on it, which I recently checked out. It was like a year after his speech, but he was saying that what was becoming a more accepted theory, my theory, after my TED video has just, it's exploded. the interest in it, and the experimentation in it. By this point, don't we have enough examples of success stories or failures?
Surely. I mean, look, you don't even need to look at peer-reviewed studies. You just need to look at all the photos that I've been sent from farmers across the country that are, again, don't lump all of these farmers in with the same fucking things as Monsanto and the bunyip aristocracy of Australia. There are caring. I've interviewed one of them. Very caring. And same with Alan Savory. They're like, oh, you're taking it from someone who has cattle. And it's like, yeah, he has cattle now. He used to be a scientist. He used to be a conservationist that worked with the Zimbabwean government. He went into farmland because he realized, I'm going to start experimenting with this and seeing where it goes. And you could see it. He's his land, and it's the same with the guy that I was interviewing as well. So virtually drought proof to begin with. You just look at his land in comparison to all of his neighbors, and it's just desert, arid land with a bunch of cows eating hay. That's what they're eating. On his land, his cows are eating grass.
Have you heard, Angus and Coot? The Coot from Angus and Coot? He had a sustainable farm experiment going. Do you know anything about that?
No.
Well, I saw a documentary on it, and he was working with this Alan Savory type character in Australia. I can't remember his name. His first name's Pete or something. Where he had just had a farm that he was doing some unorthodox experimentation to essentially make his farm drought proof. And his neighbors were pissed at him until he eventually got the Coot from Angus and Coot, who unfortunately is now dead, to sort of sponsor him with his mission. But part of the thing that they were doing was that essentially they were trying to slow down the water that is flowing.
Yes.
And so it just floods the land.
Yeah.
And that makes it drought proof because there's more water in the land that comes out later when there is a dry season.
Yes.
So you're less dependent on rainfall.
Yes.
And they were showing pictures of that farm. It was way greener than their neighbor's farm. The difference was just insane. So that's not grazing though, but do you think that's also a thing that we could do?
Well, that's also something that scientist, you really should check out that podcast. It's on this channel. But it was by Bruce Maynard, and he goes around the world listening to talks of sustainable scientists, sustainable agriculturists, and he gets all of those ideas and he puts it on his farm and sees what works and what doesn't. And he swears by Alan Savory and, now that you refresh my memory about that, the slowing water technique. Yeah. These are two very simple solutions.
Dude, wait, Alan Savory, I'll just tell you that much, not knowing much about him, when he talks, the manner in which he speaks, you have to listen to that man.
Yeah, he's good at talking.
He seems like a very intelligent person.
Yeah.
He killed 40,000 elephants.
Yes.
He's a powerful man.
And he admits to that. He says that the land got worse as a result of doing that. And he's saying that it was obviously he is a conservationist. He did it because he thought this is going to help the environment, and it made the environment worse, and his entire life is trying to make up for that crime that he sees in his head.
Yeah, well, and even in when you see a land that has very few animals on it, it's usually barren. And land that has more animals is usually greener.
Yes.
Now, maybe the animals prefer greener areas.
Maybe.
But maybe there's something else to it. You never see these extremely dead lands that have lots of animals on them because they're eaten away. It's the opposite.
No, it's exactly it, because this whole thing, right? It's a problem that human beings are going to have to deal with, which is the same problem that Alan Savory is addressing here, which is the huge reduction of biomass in the environment, the global environment. There's just way fewer animals than there was. And so they can't do the job that they used to do.
Dude, you know what you need to do, Jordan? You need to make money like Coot did, and then you need to sponsor farms. Farmers that are already doing this stuff, you need to sponsor them. I would
love to.
But you need more money for that shit. So get on that shit. Start making more money.
No, I absolutely will, because this is the whole thing that when you actually talk to people instead of just watching documentaries on Netflix, you realize that there's some really, really smart farmers that shock horror. You shouldn't be denigrating because they fucking feed you.
Yeah.
You know, like they actually, like, it's not every farmer that's out there just being like, bloody greenish, fuck them. There's those farmers, and then there's
like
also
Muslims.
like hippie farmers.
They're like Muslims. Some of them are bad, but generally speaking, you can't say they're all bad.
Yeah. It's
once in a while someone blows up, but most of them don't blow up. Anyways,
but like the main takeaway from it is it's about increasing biodiversity. That's the main issue that human beings have to grapple with, and this is something that biologists talk about all the time, which is called plugging. Now, that is what they try, and then, you know, you get these smug responses of like, oh yeah, like with cane toads, and it's like, yeah, okay, maybe the science has evolved a little since the 1800s, and now they know what animals actually can be compatible with these environments and how they should be regulated.
You know, the only way unfortunately, there's nothing you can say on this podcast, or there's nothing that you can really do in terms of advocacy that would convince people. The only thing that can convince people of this is by seeing actual real life examples that are economically viable. Like Texas wind farming, Texas was always an oil state. And if people, when they first started introducing wind energy or like sourcing energy from wind, it was a joke for most of their oil producing neighbors. But eventually they turned around when they saw that shit, these guys are profitable. Like they're making money off of this. So I think the only way you can actually get people to adopt this on a large scale is by producing these like sort of isolated success stories.
Which is what that guy does. Bruce Maynard is a legend. He goes across the world, across Australia, to farms that are, you know, he's the Gordon Ramsay of farming. Like he just goes around and he says, this is how you should be running your farm for it to be profitable. And it's always in alignment with increasing the biodiversity. So the animals are doing a lot of the jobs of, again, this study, I saw it, they were saying the same thing, you know, assuming that you're using all of these manufactured fertilizers on the land still, which is, no, that's not what you, no.
Yeah.
You know, there's ways around that.
All right. Well, look, I feel like you're going to get another comment after this airs. And every week we're going to be doing this now.
Oh, yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Maybe you should